Welcome to a special edition of Seahawks Forever, an extended recap, we'll call this. Recently, I put together my countdown of the top 20 Seahawks entering into training camp in 2026 as they try to defend their Super Bowl championship. But it's not the 20 best players, in my opinion, but the 20 most important players. The first 10 I did in increments of 2 each. They each got their own episode, 2 at a time. And then I unveiled my top 10 in full in a live show. And so what I thought I would do here on this last weekend before veterans report and we get into full training camp, rookies reported to the VMAC on Friday, thought I'd go back and put it all together. So what I've done, I've tried to cut out as much redundancy here as possible. So I cut out all the intros, just get to the meat and potatoes, cut out all of the extra ad reads so that it's just the one. This episode brought to you by Prize Picks, by the way. Just a chance, a little bit of a long form video in case you missed any of those episodes. You want to catch up on my entire top 20 most important Seahawks. Thanks for watching Seahawks Forever. Appreciate you. Hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Let's go.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Number 20, Josh Jobe, cornerback, 29 years old now, entering his sixth year in the league, 5'11", 190 pounds. He just signed a new deal through 2028. Now, Jobe's story is about as Seahawk as you can get. He's a guy that, played at Alabama and played a lot of games at Alabama, I remember scouting him going into his draft as a guy that might have some appeal as a day 3 guy. But he didn't land. He didn't carve himself out a role initially, early in his career. He was a practice squad player in Philadelphia. And then the Seahawks signed him to their practice squad in August of 2024. He was promoted to the active roster on November 11th and, got some opportunities and made some plays. It was one of those classic cases of limited sample size, but he just kept doing good stuff. You noticed it. He's tight in coverage. He's sticky. He's knocking the ball away. And then, we know what happened next, and he was able to carve out a bigger role. And last year, in mostly a rotational situation with Riq Woolen, I was really the de facto starter at that second cornerback spot opposite Devin Witherspoon, and just seemed to get better and better and better every day. He's one of those guys he's very quiet, goes about his business. I've heard from some of the reporters that cover the team that he's not the most willing interview in the world, not because he's stubborn or cranky or any of those things, or just he's about as shy a player is what I can understand, what I can gather, as you might find on that Seahawk team. But he's happy to be here because then he ended up signing, before free agency started, a 3-year deal with the Seahawks, $24 million, an $8 million average annual value. And that's great value for the Seahawks to bring back a starting caliber corner in the prime of his career, and a guy that you could make the argument is still ascending because he's only been a full-time starter now, or a partial starter for a couple of years, that that ranks 37th in the league right now among cornerbacks for average annual value. To get a guy like that, and there are times throughout the year, if you're a fan of PFF or whatever, where his coverage grades and his passer rating against and all those things, you can make the argument he's the most underrated player on the Seahawks roster. One of the most underrated players in the league. But the experts know, and when the Seahawks signed him for 3 years and $24 million, I was almost universally applauded as a steal, just a great value by them. Of course, they faced the prospect of losing both Riq Woolen and Josh Jobe in free agency. And then they would have had to really do some work to kind of rebuild that room around Devin Witherspoon. They didn't want that to happen. And Josh is just a guy, you can kind of tell there's certain players when Mike Macdonald talks about him, he perks up a little bit. And you can tell he's a favorite. Much more physical in the run game than you expect for a guy his size. 12 passes defensed in 2025. That's tied for 7th in the NFL. I've got his expected role as the primary cornerback too. I think it's possible he plays more snaps than he did last year, that his snap share goes up. We like Julian Neal, who they took in the 3rd round this last year. Big physical corner out of Arkansas. But the reality is, as much as I like Neal as a prospect, he only has 1 year as a full-time starter under his belt. Go look at his numbers from Fresno State before he transferred to Arkansas for his final season. He didn't play a lot, but he did at Arkansas. And so, the combination of stepping up in competition to the SEC and then also being as productive as he was. And then he went down to the Senior Bowl, made an impression. He had a good combine workout. Love the upside. Love the future for Julian Neal. But we keep hearing about how difficult it is to learn this Mike Macdonald defense and how in year 3, with all the continuity back on that defense, 7 players who played 400 snaps or more last year, that he might push them a little bit harder, open that playbook a little bit more, add some more concepts that are more complex, more confusing for the offense. But the learning curve for a young guy to get into that rotation might be a little steep. And so I think at least initially this year, he's going to play more snaps than he did a year ago. Now, Noah Igbenogany may also factor into that equation. He's a guy that was drafted in the 1st round by the Dolphins a few years ago and was considered a bust by them because he didn't live up to their expectations. Then he's bounced around a little bit, Cowboys, Commanders, and he's played better. But the thing that really perked my ears up when they acquired Igbenogany was John Schneider saying that he had tried to acquire him several times over the last couple of years. So they clearly like him. Now, he's got inside-out versatility, but I think Job's going to be the main guy and will look a whole lot more this year like a full-time starter. Career stats in 54 games, 24 starts, 114 tackles, 23 passes defense, 2 interceptions. He's got a half sack, a forced fumble. Last year, 15 starts technically in 16 games played, 54 tackles, 12 passes defensed, as I said, tied for 7th in the league, and 1 interception. So I've got Josh Jobe kicking things off as my number 20 most important Seahawk. Number 19 on the top 20 most important Seahawks list, according to me, Julian Love. Safety, of course, 28 years old now, going into his 9th year in the league, 5'11", 195 pounds. He's signed through 2027. His key 2025 stat, I've got it as the Super Bowl interception. That one pick in the Super Bowl, I think, is his key stat, and his expected role is he's a glue guy. I had the honor of talking about him last week with Chuck Powell on KJR Radio. He is the glue of that defense and the biggest communicator on the back end in a defense that puts a tremendous amount of value and importance on communication. He was acquired by the Seattle Seahawks, of course, in 2023 as an unrestricted free agent. And after 4 seasons with the Giants. And the cool thing about Love is, that last season, 2023, was still Pete Carroll. Completely different defense, totally different role. He had a great year that year, made the Pro Bowl. And then look what he's done now in 2 seasons playing for Mike Macdonald. Just really shows you his versatility, his intelligence. You see the instincts when he plays. He's capable of playing both safety spots. He can even play some boundary corner, played corner at Notre Dame. Current contract pays him $33 million over 3 years. He has 2 years left on that at $11 million average annual value. That places him 21st among safeties in the NFL, according to Over the Cap. Career stats in 106 games, 497 tackles, 46 passes defensed, 13 interceptions, 2.5 sacks, 6 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries. and made the Pro Bowl, as I said, in 23-24, back-to-back 100 tackle seasons as a Seahawk, and then the interception in the Super Bowl. It's hard to understate his importance to this defense. On a defense loaded with leaders, he might be right there with Jaron Reed as the most crucial leaders of that bunch. And as much as and last year he had some injury issues, only played in 8 games. He missed 8 regular season games in 2025 after playing all 17 games during his Seahawk career in the years prior, not really having any injury issues during his 4 seasons in New York either. Just because Ty Okada came in, did a solid job, he playing with Kobe Bryant, you saw the difference when Love came back, especially when he came back healthy. His ability to come up and be physical and play the run, and also to be instinctive and be the quarterback of that back end. And you saw that in the Super Bowl, leading up to that interception, the mic'd up stuff, right? The all access stuff, where he's telling the guys on the sidelines, hey, this guy's going to throw me one. He's doing that thing that young quarterbacks do, where you can see that he's thinking about it before he does it. I mean, we're talking split seconds here. And he's noticing that. He's sensing it. And he had a near interception, and he came back and he's like, he's going to throw one to me though. And he did. He certainly did. He threw it right to him later in the game in a play that kind of sealed it, or felt like it did in the moment. So just a really, really crucial player to that Mike Macdonald defense, and really hope that he can stay healthy. And now he gets to mentor a guy like Bud Clark, who had 15 interceptions in his career at TCU, a guy that the scouting staff and coaching staff loved. He was a priority for them in the draft. One of those, we don't want to leave the draft without this guys. And now Julian Love gets to take a guy like that under his wing and coach him up. And as much as we saw some good stuff from Ty Okada last year, and this is something that Greg talked about with us too after mandatory minicamp, when I suggested that it might take a while for the younger guys to get ingrained in this defense because of the complexity of the scheme, he said, that's true, but probably not for Bud Clark. They kind of have him on a crash course. They want to get him up to speed and have him play a big role initially. And he might be a guy that plays all over too. He might play some big nickel in the slot. He might play a little bit of boundary corner as well. He's certainly capable of doing that. But Julian Love's going to play a big role in that, coaching him up, getting him ready, teaching him the communication and the calls and the reactions, and being a mentor to him. And that's one of the reasons that I think he makes this list, in addition to just being a really good player, is the importance of the intangible parts of his role. It's Anthony Bradford. And again, I think this is maybe the best example that I have on this list of most important, and that designation, versus best. I think we can all agree he's not one of the top 20 best players on the Seahawks. Although, as I say that out loud, there's only 22 starters, right? We know he's got some issues. We know that he's struggled particularly in pass protection throughout his career. And really in the first couple of years of his career, struggled to be durable. There are some indications that he improved dramatically in those areas last year. I'll get to some of those numbers here in a minute, but I also see a shift happening among Seahawk fans. I have more people now in my comments on the live shows or in the videos or on Twitter say, hey, he's a serviceable starting guard on a Super Bowl team, and he continues to get better every year. He's still, look at this. If you're watching on YouTube, I've got just kind of his player card up here. It's crazy to think he's entering into the 4th year, the last year of his rookie contract. Of course, he was drafted in the 4th round, number 108 overall in 2023 out of LSU. He's still just 25 years old. Just turned 25 this spring. That's pretty crazy to think about, especially with some of the older prospects that we've seen come out in college, not so much in the 2026 draft, but certainly 25 and 24 with all the COVID extra eligibility years and everything. We saw some of the top offensive linemen were coming out, guys that were taken all throughout day 2 on the last couple of years that were coming out at 24 years old, 25. Emmanuel Pregnon was 25 years old when he was drafted this year and had the one good year to kind of get on the NFL radar and get drafted. I mean, Bradford has 3 years as a starter with the Seahawks. He's also earned the starting job with 2 different head coaches, 3 different offensive line coaches, and warded off competition from Christian Haynes, who was a 3rd-round pick, and all the other young guys they've drafted to try to push him. I just want to take you down memory lane for a little bit. When he was drafted, I think we were all really excited about it. I mean, you talk about the value that you get from a 4th-round pick, number 108 overall. I remember Brock Heward, who was doing commentary for college football at that time, and he had done some games saying, man, this guy's got all sorts of upside. And he showed up on a bunch of lists that year of kind of sleeper steal sort of picks from the draft that could turn out. I mean, this guy at, 6'4", 335 pounds, running a 5 flat 40, essentially with a 10-yard split of 166. Those are elite numbers. You see the vertical, the explosive testing numbers, right? The 30-inch vert and the 810 broad. It really indicated potential upside there, right? And then the positional versatility, played both tackle spots, actually played some left tackle in the SEC at LSU, an RAS score of 9.81. It's pretty crazy. And now there's a growing trend, talked about this on the show a couple of weeks ago, that maybe this guy gets extended and that this isn't his last year in Seattle, as many of us hope that it would be. And when I say hope that it will be, I come at it more so from, I really like some of the guys from behind him. And I think you guys know how much I like Bo Stevens and loved that we made the aggressive move to move back up into the 5th round, trading a 2027 draft pick to get there and take him. I do hope that he's the starter long-term, but Bradford has earned his incumbency. He's earned the opportunity to go into camp as the starter. And if somebody beats him out, great. But he did something last year that he hadn't done in his pro career up until this point. He played and started all 17 games. He kind of took care of the durability part of it. And we'll see if that continues. He had a couple of practices. They held him out in OTAs. I think his back was kind of tightening up a couple of times. I've got as his expected role, run game mauler. And I wanted to show you some of the improvement numbers. Now, a lot of you like to use PFF, especially when it comes to offensive linemen. And I do think for all of PFF's inconsistencies and issues, it's one entity that is attempting to grade the entire league and use the same parameters and apply them to all the players. So at least whether you agree with their grades or not, it's a consistent process. It's a measuring stick from someone. It's so hard with offensive linemen. And don't tell me about the clips that you see on social media where he looks bad. You can do that with anyone. I've maintained last year when that was really working against Bradford, when those videos were starting to get traction. And it kind of reminded me, it happened to Justin Britt when they moved him from tackle to guard, and how lost he looked at left guard until they moved him to center, and then he found a home. You could have done that with Gray's Abel last year. He definitely had some welcome to the NFL rookie moments, and you could easily have clipped 6, 7, 8 plays that made him look really bad and put him out on social media and say, look, this guy's a bust. It happens with everybody. Sure. More with Anthony Bradford. He's a bender at the waist in pass protection. He gets caught sometimes with his head down. At his size, even with those athletic testing numbers, sometimes he gets beat by quickness. That's still an issue. But let's just look at this for a moment. So his overall grade last year, according to PFF, is, and again, I I actually kind of like PFF for offensive linemen because there aren't any other stats to go by. We can't look at catches, targets, right? Stuff like that. 50.6. That would rank him 70th out of 81 qualified guards. It's terrible. It's bad. And those are the numbers that people throw at me when they're, trying to tell me how bad Bradford is. Pass blocking grade of 40.8, 76th out of 81 qualified guards. A little bit better as a run blocker, 54.7, 57th out of 81 qualified guards. He should be a good run blocker because he's so physical. I mean, we have seen him obliterate some of the best tackles in the league. We've seen him dominate Jeffrey Simmons on reps. You want to talk about isolating reps? Let's put 10 plays together of him completely dominating Jeffrey Simmons or Vita Vea or Greg Gaines, that Tampa Bay game where those two guys combined for 0 stats. I thought it was one of Bradford's finest moments, especially that last scoring drive that got us close. Now, the progression throughout the year. First of all, week 11, that game against the Rams, the one that Sam Darnold would like to forget, he gave up 0 pressures, 0 sacks, 0 hits, 0 hurries against that defensive line. Kobe Turner, Braden Fisk, Jared Verse, Byron Young, all those guys. And that, I think maybe that was the confidence builder because from that point on, let's see. So weeks 1 through 8, he had an 18 pass block grade by PFF. That's as bad as it gets. Since week 9, so the improvement happened a little bit before the Rams game. From week 9 on, 79.8, which would have put him in the top 12 of all guards in football. It gets even better. From week 13 on, 87.1, which would have made him the 4th best pass blocking guard in all of football. So the reason he shows up on this list, even though I say expected role, run game mauler, the success of this group as a whole, all 5 starters returning, the youngest offensive line in the league last year, all that continuity, they all played over 700 snaps together, and they return with John Benton running the show again, one of the most respected offensive line coaches in the league. Someone who believes in this group, is excited about this group, and that's one of the reasons he spurned the chance to go to Vegas with Kubiak, is he likes this group and he wants to see them come together, and he thinks he can build them into one of the best offensive lines in the league. And he has an affinity for Bradford. I mentioned earlier some indications that he might be extended. Well, Corbin Smith has been saying for quite some time now that he thinks there's a better chance that Bradford gets extended than someone beats him out this year. And Greg Bell has echoed some of those sentiments as well, talked about it on the show here a few weeks ago. The reason he's so important is because he is the weakest link on that line. I know some of you think that Jalen Sundell is not that good a player. I disagree, and I think his best football is still ahead of him. I think he has Pro Bowl potential, which I wasn't quite sure. As much as I've liked him since the day I first laid eyes on him, I wasn't sure if he quite had that kind of potential. I think he does now. But Bradford, this offensive line is going to be as good as Bradford will allow them to be. They were still in the top 7 or 8 last year in the league as far as using a 6th man in protection. Imagine how it would open up this offense even more under Brian Fleury in his first year if they don't have to do that as often and that's one more guy to get out into pass patterns, right? So regardless of how good or bad you might think Anthony Bradford is, there are 2 truths I think that are very evident here. One is that the improvement, it's pretty undeniable. If you don't like PFF or you don't agree with their numbers, just the eye test, or just look at the functionality of the offense as a whole from week 11 on and how much better that run game got week to week to week. And then the other thing is that he is important to the success of this offensive line. If he can take another step forward, if the Anthony Bradford that we see to start the season in 2026 is the Anthony Bradford that we saw from week 9 on last year, be a top 10 to top 12 pass blocking guard, in addition to his physicality in the run game, he'll whiff from time to time. He'll get beat with quickness from time to time, but he'll obliterate some guys too. That's why he's on this list as the 18th most important player on the Seahawks, in my opinion. All right, who's number 17 on my top 20 list of most important players? And it's a young guy, Riley Mills, entering into his second year. Of course, the defensive lineman drafted in the 5th round, number 142 overall last year in the 2025 draft out of Notre Dame. And you can thank Sam Howell for this pick. They used Howell, traded him to Minnesota in order to trade up a little bit to get Mills. And if you're not familiar with this story, this is a guy that was at worst a top 100 player, would have been taken on day 2 last year. The Seahawks have said in their offseason behind the scenes video series this offseason that they think that he would have been a 2nd round pick if he had been healthy, but he blows his ACL in the college football playoffs. And so when they draft him, they knew he was going to start the season on the PUP list. And they were very conservative in how they brought him along in his rehab. I remember being there in training camp for a month and seeing him out there, and he had the compression sleeve on, and he was just doing some light running. We see guys come back from ACLs in 7-8 months now. But from the moment they drafted him, John Schneider was saying probably November. And I remember it got to the point, you may have seen me say this on the show, where I thought, it's so late in the year now, just redshirt him. And I use that term as an example. It's obviously not an NFL term, but there is an advantage to it. We saw this with Darrell Taylor a number of years ago. If a rookie misses his entire first year because of injury and he's on the PUP list or the physically unable to perform list, then his contract would toll. So they would have still had 4 years of contractual control by not playing him. And then they chose to. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll see what he has. And you could see the rust, man. There were a couple times where his balance was off or he took a bad step, and he was on the ground quite a bit his first couple of times. Not a lot of production, 3 tackles in 4 games. But then we got this in the Super Bowl, right? And this is my favorite play from the entire game. Like, he just takes Jared Wilson, who was a 2nd round center guard out of Georgia, right? Played in the SEC, highly regarded prospect, and just dominates him physically in a way that you don't often see in this league. Just pushes him back with a single arm there. Doesn't put his second hand on him until he's already 5 yards deep into the backfield, and then literally tackles him and Drake May at the same time. And he gets up for the celebration, which is now, well, let's just watch that one more time. It's so beautiful. And then, of course, the celebration, that's what he used on his player card here. 6'5", 296, entering his second year, of course, 24 years old. Signed through 2028 on that rookie contract. I've got his expected role as explosive, rotational defensive lineman. Explosive, as we saw in that Super Bowl rep, right? The big sack there. And then I don't know if you saw some of the still shots and video of him working out with Leonard Williams this week, but that's an exciting thing to envision. And that's why he shows up where he does on this list. Because when you talk about most important, I think the biggest contribution he can make this year is to provide a counterpunch to Byron Murphy and Leonard Williams. To make offenses have to account for somebody else. We don't really talk about it anymore because even Byron Murphy himself has come out and said, I like playing the nose tackle position. I like doing those things. I like taking on double teams. And that's great that he embraces that. But I still maintain that defensive line could be even better, believe it or not, than they were in 2025 with another explosive element added. And if Mills can be that guy, then it's going to be harder for teams to double team Murphy. It's going to be harder for them to focus on Leonard Williams and some of those other guys. And I think the reason he's so important, and this list is focused on 2026, but when you zoom out and take a 360 degree, more of a long-term vision, just to have a young guy with his kind of upside and ceiling and potential in an aging room, right? Jaron Reed is approaching his mid-30s. We don't know how much longer he's going to play, even though he's under contract beyond 2026. Leonard Williams entering the last year of his deal. He's 32 now. He has a growing family. We don't know. I've been told that there's mutual interest in the two getting at least a short extension done. Maybe he kind of goes on a rolling year-to-year type basis. But that's an aging defensive line group, and they haven't really added to it outside of Mills. Now, they used a 7th-round pick this year on Devin Eastern from Minnesota, and I really, really like his upside and potential as a nose tackle with really long arms and a high motor. But when you talk about building blocks, it's Murphy and it's Mills are the young guys. So that's why he's so important, I think, and that's why he's on this list. And you know what? Let's just watch this Super Bowl sack. Again, it's so, so good. To get your first sack in the NFL in the Super Bowl, I think that's only been done 2 or 3 other times in history. All right, let's get right into this. So my number 16 most important player, and again, just to qualify, if you haven't watched the episode so far and you're kind of jumping in now, and then you're going to go back and watch the others, and I will make sure and link those in the description below so you can kind of just go right to the next one or the previous one, as it were, without having to go back to your homepage in YouTube. I will do that for you. Not the best 20 players, but the players that I feel like are most important to the Seahawks' fortunes on the field in 2026. Barner, I think, is one of the more intriguing players on this roster, and I think he's a guy that the world is going to find out about A.J. Barner this year if they haven't already. Fantasy football players probably know him a little bit. He has scored 10 touchdowns over the last 2 years, but I think he's just scratching the surface of his potential. Just recently turned 24 years old in his 4th year. Or that's a mistake there. He is entering into the 3rd year. Sorry about the typo. Entering into his 3rd year in the league. 6'6", 254 pounds, out of Michigan. He was drafted in the 4th round in the 2024 draft, 121st overall. And that was a pretty deep tight end class. And I even have to admit that when they drafted Barner, I was aware of him, but I didn't study him hard, not as hard as some of the other tight ends in the class. But man, has he turned out to be a key component of this roster, not just as a player, but as you can see down below, if you're watching on YouTube, for his expected role, a do-it-all Y tight end, one of those rare guys that is as good blocking and can block some of the better defensive ends in the league as he is getting out and running routes and being a weapon in the pass game. But also you can see their spiritual leader. He has really become, in a locker room full of leaders, really become a big part of the fabric of the personality of this team. That was evident the first time I ever got to experience him, when he came to their rookie dinner that we used to put on every year. Well, they still do. I'm just not with El Gaucho anymore. Just he had a presence about him for such a young guy. He was only 21 years old at the time, that it made you go, there might be something more to this guy than we thought. And then I always give him crap, my buddy Curtis Allen from the Seahawks draft blog, but he kind of, perception sometimes is hard to shake. And I remember he went out to one of the training camp practices, Barner's rookie year, and he made a comment, something like, it looked like he was running in sand. And I thought, oh geez, he's just not that athletic. So maybe he's just going to be like a Will Dissly, just kind of a block first tight end that might leak out and catch a stray every once in a while in the pass game. He has turned out to be much, much more than that. Maybe part of that's the physical development, because he was so young, still kind of growing into his body. Entering in, he's under contract through 2027 for his key 2025 stat. I've got 6 touchdowns there. Really became a weapon in the red zone. And I think it's tip of the iceberg, especially with, Brian Fleury has talked pretty openly about, and so has Mike McDonald, about getting the tight ends more consistently involved in this offense, having them all run the full route tree. And with Fleury's tight end coaching background under Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, you have to think that that's more than just lip service. That not that, he favors tight ends because he's coached them, but more so that he has seen up close and personal for the last 7 years, working hand in hand with Kyle Shanahan to design plays and even involved on game day in some of the decisions to call plays. He's seen how dangerous the tight end can be in this offense. Not just George Kittle, who's one of the all-time greats, but look what Jake Tonjes would do when Kittle would be out. I mean, we certainly saw that up close and personal week 1 last year, right? Tonjes outreaching Reek Woolen for the game when he touchdown on the final play. But that wasn't the only time he produced. It's an integral part of the offense. Sometimes the tight end is the first read or the second read. I think that's going to happen a little bit more often, even than it did under Clint Kubiak. There just was a lack of consistency, in my opinion, from game to game at how involved the tight ends were. Sometimes they'd flash and they'd get the key play, and that was Barner a lot of times. But I want to see a little bit more consistency, right? And not just Barner, but, getting Elijah Arroyo involved in the game as well. Ridiculously cheap contract, 1.194 average annual value, which would put him 111th according to Over the Cap with tight ends. However, that's going to change a year from now. I talked a couple of weeks ago when Brenton Strange signed his deal in Jacksonville, which gets him up there in the top 20 AAV in the league. That's probably a good comp for Barner. He's looking at a nice payday next offseason when he's eligible for that extension. He's become one of the more likable players on the team. Who could ever forget week 16 after that overtime victory over the Rams on Thursday Night Football? The shot of him, I think it's one of the best shots of the year, where he kind of jumps up in the first, right in front of the stands, and you can see the stands kind of sloping up ahead of him. Everyone's going crazy. He's holding his arms up. And then the parade stuff, like wearing that coat that he was wearing with the fur collar and I think the cowboy hat, right? The guy enjoys life. He enjoys playing football. And I think he's a great example of, I feel like we see this at the tight end position, maybe more so than any other skill position, where the difference in the profile that they achieve in the NFL versus what we thought of them in college, because they just aren't used in college that much. Michigan has kind of underutilized their tight ends sort of consistently for years, I think. And it lends itself sometimes to surprises like Barner, that I think through 2 years in the league has exceeded most expectations for what draft experts saw in him coming out of Michigan. Really excited to see what he'll do in this offense this year. All right, the number 15 most important player on my top 20 list of most important Seahawks is DeMarcus Lawrence, the old man in the room. The guy that some people didn't think was going to come back this year. 34 years old. He got himself a ring. He had some injuries, some pretty significant injuries for really the first time in his career, or at least in a while the year before. There were some indications he considered retirement before signing with the Seahawks, that he may have considered it this last offseason. He's signed through 2027, and now it seems like he's re-energized. Great interview with him during the last mandatory minicamp, where he talked about, look, work-life balance. I'm just not going to sacrifice my family life during these opportunities in the offseason to be away from the family when you're away from them the entire regular season. But that he sounded as energized and excited and passionate about playing football as he ever has. And so I'm not so sure that he won't fulfill his contract and play through 2027, which would certainly be good with some of the other contract situations on Uchenna Nwosu in the last year of his deal. Entering his 13th year in the league, 34 years old, 6'3", 254 pounds. I've got his key 2025 stat. Well, I'll get back to that in just a second. His expected role, elder statesman plus still a badass. I know that's not an official position, but I think it is. And now back to his key 2025 stat. He was disruptive. He was around the football a lot. He affected the football. He made the football come alive, as Coach McDonald would say. And that was never evident more so than in the Week 10 game at Lumen Field against the Arizona Cardinals. This is one of his 2 fumble returns for a touchdown, one of the only defensive players in the history of the NFL to score 2 touchdowns, defensive touchdowns in one game. And what I love about this play is you see that even at the age of 34 and coming off a season the year before where he had a foot injury, and sometimes those things can linger. This is a great example of his agility, his lateral quickness, that he still has something left in the tank. Boom, on the, this is a pretty trademark McDonald play, right? Where he's got Tyrese Knight smashing into the guard to clear that space for Lawrence to loop inside, and the closing speed still to get to the quarterback. Knight beats him to it, and then he's there, the awareness to scoop the ball, run it back for the touchdown. Just an outstanding. I've got on the graphic there, it's his first touchdown of the game. This is actually the second touchdown of the game. That is a mistake on my part. My apologies. But I think it just goes to show you what he's got left in the tank, and the numbers back that up as well. Yeah, according to PFF, in 2025, credited with 52 total pressures, 8 sacks, 12 quarterback hits, 32 hurries, while also earning their number 1 run defense grade as an edge defender. And then ESPN backs up what an all-around contributor he was in 2025 by their pass rush win rate metrics, which are based on the GPS chips that they wear in their pads, ranked 15th among edge defenders in 2025, a 14% pass rush win rate with 27 wins on 187 pass rush snaps. Just for context, Boye Mafe ranked 8th. So he was one of 2 Seattle Edge players in the top 15. So an older player approaching his mid-30s, coming off an injury-riddled year. A lot of Cowboys fans, when we signed him in free agency, said, good riddance, good luck with that. He's washed. A lot of the offseason grades a year ago kind of ripped the Seahawks, thought that they overpaid for him because of those things that I just mentioned. And then not only did he produce the way that I just spelled out there as both a run defender and a pass rusher, but that veteran presence in the locker room, especially on that defense with so many young guys, combined with a Leonard Williams and a Jaron Reed in, grooming guys like Byron Murphy, taking guys like that under their wing, Derek Hall, right? A Riley Mills now coming up, and some of the other young guys that really didn't get their shot last year, a Jared Ivey, who we might see more from this season, or a Connor O'Toole. Invaluable. Like he walks into the room anywhere at the VMAC or in the weight room or in the locker room, and he immediately gains respect. You have to have players like this on championship rosters. It's really hard to win championships with a roster as young as the Seahawks is overall, one of the youngest in the league. I think on a snap-weighted basis, by the time they got to the playoffs last year, it was 5th youngest in the league, which, you have guys like Lawrence at 34, Reed at 32, Leo at 32. You have some of those guys kind of bringing the average up, and yet it still was top 5 in the league as far as youth. You have to sprinkle some of this in so that the guys see what it takes, the commitment, the work ethic. And that's why I think he is still one of the most important players on this team. I think his experience in the league is going to help ground this team if they get a little too full of themselves, a little too high because they won a championship, and also keep reminding them that you have to work harder after you win a championship than you do to gain a championship, because now everyone's gunning for you. and then to be able to take some of those young edge players under their wing. But today, let's start with number 14. And yeah, if my hat didn't give it away, it's Abe Lucas, the right tackle for the Seahawks. And really a redemption story in 2025 and the culmination of a 2-year journey that must have been incredibly frustrating and even confusing at times for him, because certainly it was confusing for us. If you remember when the injury first happened, Pete Carroll at the time was very vague about what the injury was and how serious it was. And that sort of led to some speculation because we had to fill in the blanks ourselves. And I know there was a period of time where, maybe the word degenerative started to be used, sounded like one of those things that they had a hard time kind of figuring out what it was. And so then they couldn't figure out exactly how to fix it. And we still haven't gotten full clarity on that, although I believe that the consensus seems to be that it might have been a patella tendon injury. And it took them a while to identify it and figure it out, and then for him to fix it. And until last offseason, he only played 6 games in 2023, 7 games in 2024. And then last summer was the first time that he was able to have a fully healthy offseason to prep for the season. And when we saw him come back at the end of 2024, it was promising, certainly. He felt he had a grip on the injury, but you could still kind of see the lack of explosion wasn't quite there from what we were used to seeing from Lucas after he started all 16 games his rookie year in 2022. And then between plays, you could still see him kind of favoring it as he jogged back to the huddle, those kinds of things. But then he really put it all together finally in 2025 and played and started all 17 games. And I believe didn't have to miss a practice. The team didn't even have to do the load management thing like they do with so many of their other veterans. I think they gave him some veteran rest days along the way. But he never had to miss a practice because of the knee. Fully healthy. And so now I'm even more excited to get him back for a second straight season after a second off season of full health, right? And being able to push it even harder in his off-season workouts. Acquired in 2022, of course, in the 3rd round, pick number 72. And when the pick was announced, I was obviously predictably excited because once a Coug, always a Coug. And I was really happy to see him. He was one of my favorite tackle prospects in the draft. Actually wouldn't have been surprised if he had gone in the 2nd round that year. But also because of what the pick represented at the time. I think that was the moment for me that I really started to realize that, we're doing things differently now in the draft. Like there was that stretch, right? What can we all agree? Like 2015 to 2020, 21, where, 21 was kind of the COVID draft, doesn't really count. But it was 22 that we all started to see the draft approach change. And now that we've seen 4 drafts since then, stacked on top of each other, great draft after great draft after great draft, culminating in a young, deep, balanced, dynamic roster that just won a Super Bowl. John Schneider has now come to explain to us all that, there were some intentional changes in their process around that time. And so as long as we'd struggled to fix that offensive line, right, and adequately address it and tried to find late round bargains in the draft, trusted Tom Cable to call the shots and to try to convert guys from other positions. And John even admits one of his biggest mistakes in his career was going cheap on the offensive line to try to afford to re-sign all the LOB guys after the first back-to-back Super Bowls. Well, not the first ones, but, Super Bowl 48 and 49. And I thought, okay, they addressed it at number 9 with Charles Cross that year, thanks to the Russell Wilson trade. For them to turn around and double dip at tackle and take just not only a tackle, 2 of the first 3 picks, but a tackle that I really liked, I think was a turning point for the organization and for the perception of how they were going to approach this offensive line. It's taken this long now to put all the pieces together, and John Benton's a big part of that and the new scheme and everything else. But Lucas, after that rookie year, looked like he was on his way to being a top 10 right tackle in the league. And then the knee injuries. And there was a time, I think a couple of years ago, we were talking about we should probably draft a tackle. We should probably plan for life after Abe Lucas because this just might not work. Well, now he's earned himself a second contract and signed that deal late last year, 3 years, $46 million, an average annual value of 15.3. That puts him at 13th among right tackles, according to Over the Cap. His key stat, you can see it there on the graphic for 2025, is that he started all 20 games the team played. That he was available and he was good, is the thing. According to PFF, a 75.6 overall grade that puts him 24th out of 89 tackles. Better run blocker than pass blocker. He finished 18th in their rankings as a run blocker, 44th as a pass blocker on almost 1,100 snaps. But he got better as the year went along, and he got a lot better in the postseason. A 91 grade, that's elite level for PFF. Highest among right tackles, second among all tackles in the NFL in the postseason. A 92.4 postseason run block grade. And in the Super Bowl, he allowed 0 pressures to the New England defense. He has become what we thought we were getting as a rookie, and he did it after having to overcome a very, very difficult 2-year process to fix and rehab that knee. I've got his expected role as right side offensive line rock and leader, and the reason he's so high on the most important list is I think if he can take yet another step in health, because it did look like he lost just a little bit of lateral movement last year. And when you couple that with the fact that, he had Anthony Bradford on his left side, who at times would struggle, that the Seahawks had to play a little too much six-man protection last year. And we're really hoping to see them not have to play as much. They were top 10 in the league in having to do that last year, or choosing to do that. Ryan Grubb had to do it, chose not to, and we saw the results of that the year before. But I think we might see Abe even look better this year at the age of 27 years old. This is that range where offensive linemen are in their peak. There was a really cool graph today based on a bunch of data that I saw on Twitter showing the peak years by position. And offensive linemen can play well. The good offensive linemen can play well into their mid-30s, but this 27-28 is kind of when their peak begins. So we may not have seen the best of Abe Lucas yet. And the other thing is I've got, rock and leader there. He has a quiet intensity with how he goes about his business. And he's also one of those guys that just wants to be a Seahawk, loves being a Seahawk. It was such a life-changing moment for him to sign that contract. I mean, he grew up in the area. He's never left the state as a football player. He played in North Washington, I think Everett as a high schooler, and then he went to Washington State again, obviously, and then wound up a Seahawk. And he wants to be a Seahawk for life. He's one of those guys that, this last contract, he might have had to take a discount and maybe some lower guarantees than he would have liked because of the injury history. But, he signed through 2028. 2 years from now, we might be looking at, he might deserve a contract among the top 10 in the league at that time. He's only going to be 29 years old. And so I think the best may be ahead for Abe, and the Seahawks may have to pay for that if they want him for a third contract, which I hope they will, because it'll mean that he's been healthy and has continued to be good. So he is number 14 on my list of top 20 most important Seahawks. All right, let's get to the number 13 player on my top 20 list of most important Seahawks for 2026, Rashid Shaheed. And this one is really satisfying because for a few moments there when free agency opened, we thought we were going to lose him. John Snyder's on quite an epic run now, a 3-year run of acquiring very good players at the trade deadline who are in the last year of their deal, rentals, if you will, and then convincing them to stay and signing them to new contracts. Leonard Williams, of course, the first example of that. Now he's in line for his second contract. After that, Ernest Jones, the next example. And then last year at the deadline, November 4th, right at the deadline, they dealt a 4th and 5th round pick to New Orleans to get him. And that seemed like quite a bit to give up at the time. But then, knowing now what we didn't know then, and that it turned out to be a pretty weak draft, especially in about that range of the draft. And then certainly you can't argue with the value with the production that he gave Seattle after he came over. Now, as a receiver, didn't do a whole lot. Just 15 catches with no receiving touchdowns. Had some big catches in a couple of games. He had some key plays in the Atlanta game. But it was his kick and punt return acumen and ability that really made a difference for the Seahawks. Of course, 27 years old now, heading into his 5th year. He is signed on that new deal through 2028 that pays him $17 million a year. That ranks number 30 out of 396 receivers in the league, according to Over the Cap. His PFF grade in 2025, 66.1 overall. That's 55th out of 81 qualifying receivers. A 68.2 receiving grade to put him 51st because he really didn't do much for Seattle in the second half. But the return ability, and then the big ones, of course, had a big return against Atlanta in the second half that really got that comeback going. And then the kick return to make it a one-score game, Week 16 against the Rams, was huge. And I still think that play kind of gets overshadowed a little bit by the whole 2-point conversion thing. And then it wasn't just the impact that he had when he ran the opening kickoff back to begin the playoffs in the divisional round against San Francisco at Lumen Field, but it gave us one of the best photographs of the year. Just absolutely love this one, which then led to another one of my favorite photographs from the year, and that was this one at the Super Bowl. But as I said, they wanted him back, and if you remember, the day that he met the media after he was traded here, he said, "This is where I want to be. We're going to work it out. No worries. I'm staying. I'm going to be here long term." He reiterated that late in the season, and then free agency came around, and they didn't get him done before free agency started. And then a few hours went by, and a few more hours went by, and a couple receivers got signed, and it kind of looked like Shaheed was going to get away. And I think what happened, and I'm not on an island with this. I think this is probably the consensus. But when they lost Kenneth Walker, they really wanted Kenneth Walker back, but at a certain number, and then it turned out that number was not even close to what the Kansas City Chiefs offered. And then they also tried really hard, even after free agency started, to retain Kobe Bryant. And I think if they had succeeded in getting Bryant done, maybe they don't get Shaheed, because they had to still plan for some future extensions, right? They had JSN coming up. They still don't have Devin Witherspoon done, but there's some other big contracts coming up. We saw the Derek Hall deal last month. But I think maybe Bryant getting away allowed them to step up. I do think they exceeded the number they were planning on. I think 17 was a little rich for them, or it was a little bit more than they had anticipated or thought it would take. But then you hear all sides talk afterwards. He wanted to be here. And now I think some of the buzz coming out of OTC and mini camps, he might be the buzziest player on the team. Corbin Smith said it looked like maybe he's a little bit bigger. Maybe he added some muscle this year to that 6 foot, 180-pound frame. And the chemistry that's being reported between he and Sam Darnold, especially on the deep shots, is off the charts. They didn't have a chance to build that last year, but it seems to be one of the storylines of this offseason so far. And then when you hear Mike McDonald talk, and you hear, Brock Heward, Matt Hasselbeck talk, Brady Henderson, some of these people that were there every day during OT season, watched the team up close. And there was a mention in a report a week or so ago that they're gonna get the ball into his hands in space more. short passing game. Certainly he's going to be that vertical deep shot, right? I've got that as his expected role right there. Deep threat, obviously. But JSN distraction, right? I mean, JSN was able to certainly succeed last year, Offensive Player of the Year, despite the fact that teams started to pay all the attention to him. And they weren't able to take advantage of that as much as they would have liked by getting the ball to Shaheed. But man, I like what McDonald's saying about getting the running backs involved as a first and second read at times, and then getting the ball into Shaheed's hands, middle of the field, short stuff, run after the catch. We'll still see a couple of jet sweeps, I'm sure. Line him up in the backfield a little bit. I have heard the name Deebo Samuel tossed around the last couple of months because, the Seahawks' new offensive coordinator, Brian Fleury, watched Kyle Shanahan use Deebo Samuel to his fullest when he was in his prime, when he was Deebo Samuel as a running back and a receiver. And I think that might be in the plans a little bit. We might see 2 or 3 carries some weeks from Shaheed out of the backfield, or at least line him up there as they did with JSN at times last year, to kind of throw defenses off and just make it impossible for you can't jam him on the line of scrimmage if he's not on the line of scrimmage, right? So really, really excited about that possibility. And then the return threat certainly keeps teams honest and makes them have to be at their best on their coverage teams, and he can change games. Maybe he doesn't score 3 touchdowns again all next year. That's a rare occurrence for a returner, but it's the threat of it. And it's, how many times does he get it over the 50 or get it to the 40 and the team only has to, put a drive together. They only have to go 10, 50 yards to get a field goal. Just flipping the field. It's a valuable skill. It's really, really crucial to the offense in a number of ways. And that's why he's so high on my list of most important players, checking in at number 13. Number 12. 12's Ernest Jones IV. What an integral part of this team he has become since John Schneider traded for him from the Tennessee Titans. And this is one of those classic examples of, first of all, and I talked about this yesterday, John's on a pretty epic trade deadline run, right? I mean, Leonard Williams, Ernest Jones, Rashid Shaheed, 3 straight years picking up someone at the deadline who they were all rentals in the last year of their deal. No guarantee that they were going to be able to re-sign these players. And yet they did. He's 3 for 3 in doing this. And so, we forget all about the compensation at that point because the players have all become very important players, as this list would indicate. And none more so than Ernest Jones to this point. 26 years old, entering into his 5th year in the league. I think that's a typo. Actually, it should be his 6th year. Am I correct in that? 6'2", 233 pounds, signed through 2027 with that deal that he signed last year coming off of the trade. Key 2025 stat, 5 interceptions. Like, he was really, really good in coverage. I'll show you an example of that here in a minute. That tied for second in the NFL, tied for first among linebackers. And as his expected role, he wears the green dot. He's the guy that relays the play calls from Mike Macdonald into the rest of the defense. He's responsible for a lot of the communication. We know how important communication is to this defense and this scheme. And really, in some of the ways that Mike Macdonald has taught his players to communicate, sometimes even after the ball is snapped. There's that great interview with Kirk Cousins from early in the offseason where he talks about how even when the ball is snapped, he thinks they're going to be playing one coverage and then they shift into something else on the fly. Well, if you watch the All-22, you can see those little signals that they're getting sometimes on the back end and a lot of times from Ernest Jones. He's also responsible for patrolling that middle of the field. And then I've got, as his other expected role, run fit specialist. And what I mean by this is, 6'2", 233 isn't what your typical middle linebacker used to look like. Used to be 245, 250 thumpers, right? Guys that looked like they would come up and and take on guards and tackles head on, stack and shed blocks and sift through traffic to get to ball carriers. Ernest Jones is kind of your modern day example of what a middle linebacker looks like. He's not the greatest athlete in the world, but he's good enough. He's fast enough. He gets sideline to sideline enough, and he recognizes things so quickly that he's able to recognize his fits and respond accordingly. And he's just another piece of that puzzle that Mike Macdonald uses to play lighter, even against heavy boxes. You know, that's the wave now. That's the trend in the NFL that everyone's trying to copy, is can we play nickel all the time, like Seattle kind of does, and even dime more than we ever did before, not just in obvious passing downs where there's 4 wide receivers on the field, as used to be the case, and still be able to play the run. And this allows them to play nickel on first down. And so all of these McVay and Shanahan offenses, which are all varied and multiple and show you different looks and show you run and throw out of it and vice versa, he kind of cracked the code. He found a way to be able to still defend the run on early downs, but be prepared for anything in the passing game. And Ernest Jones is a huge key to that. Like his ability to recognize where he's supposed to fill and then get in there and clog his hole, make the tackle. And now in coverage, really, really kind of taking a step forward. And here's a great example of one of his 5 interceptions from last year. And this one's a fun one because it comes against Brock Purdy. And let me go back to the beginning. You see him there in the red circle. He's off to your right as you look at the screen. I mean, he's almost head up over the tackle on that side, just shaded his inside shoulder. And then watch his first move. He goes all the way across the hash mark to your left. But see where his head is? He's not just watching the quarterback. He's reading the play. He's watching his keys and which receivers might come into his area. He sees everything, man. And then he comes all the way back to the middle of the field, not quite to where he started, and comes up with the interception that was intended for Juwan Jennings from Brock Purdy there. I think it's a great example of his instincts, his intelligence, his awareness, his ability to read that play. I mean, Brock Purdy seeing that he's ranging all the way over. And you see Purdy's head looking to the right, and then he comes back. He thinks he's got this hold of Jake Tonjes. But Jones anticipates it and gets over for the interception. Just a tremendous example of his value as a coverage player. And man, we need that because, we've talked about this a lot. That deep middle of the field is where Stafford is so good, Matthew Stafford and the Rams and McVay, and he takes advantage of that. He's not like some of these other coordinators that sort of let you off the hook sometimes and do you a favor by not continuing to go back over and over again to something that worked. McVay has kind of found that Achilles heel, and he knows he has a quarterback that's as good at that as anyone in the league. Maybe not just currently, but ever, at that deep hole shot, layering throws into tight windows, 20 yards down the field. And they've beaten the Seahawks with those plays over and over again. There was a real emphasis this year heading into the draft in the offseason to try to find players that would help them in that area. Bud Clark is apparently one of those players that they're very high on. It's why he was a priority in the second round, 15 interceptions in college. But Ernest Jones is a guy that patrols that middle of the field and makes that happen. And the amount of ground he has to cover both mentally and physically, even on a play like that, he had to be ready in case it was a run play to come up and fill. And yet he ends up 20 yards downfield making the interception. And I just think that another year in Mike Macdonald's system. We've never seen Mike Macdonald run a defense at the NFL level for a third year, right? 2 years in Baltimore. We saw the jump from year 1 to year 2 there. Now 2 years in Seattle. We saw the jump from the defense year 1 to year 2. We talk about how complex his scheme is. It takes a while to learn. Sometimes he has to take his foot off the gas and maybe not open up as much of his playbook because he feels like he gives them too much sometimes. Well, now year 3 with 7 guys back that played 400 snaps last year, that continuity and then adding in some of the young guys, right in the center of it all, wearing that green dot, is going to be Ernest Jones, and that's why he is number 12 on my list of the Seahawks' most important players. Well, the Seahawks were right about Derek Hall when they drafted him in the second round out of Auburn. 25 years old now is all in his entering into his 4th year. This would have been the last year of his rookie deal, but of course, he signed that contract early, and he took money that we all agree is probably less than he would have got on the open market next year, especially if he has another good productive year in Seattle. We saw what Boye Mafe got, $20 million a year, not being as productive as Derek Hall in a number of ways. And Hall took quite a bit less than that. He is signed now through 2029, which was really important for the Seahawks to get that done, because before that, the only edge player that they had under contract for 2027 was DeMarcus Lawrence. And, at the age of 34, we're not sure how much longer DeMarcus Lawrence is going to play, right? 6'3", 260. I've got his expected role as he's the physical tone setter. He might not be the most polished, technical pass rusher, although you see him add some moves now. When he came out of Auburn, he was all power. That's all he was. It was the single arm bar, and we could see it from both sides. I remember watching his tape against Alabama and against 2 tackles that are now NFL tackles. And he beat one with a single arm power move to one side, and then he was able to do the same thing to the other tackle on the other side. Really impressive, but that was kind of all he had in his tool bag. You see him add some to that now. He's also really improved and become the edge setter and the run defender that you would hope and expect from a guy that's built like him and is as physical and as tense as he is. Let's see, that 3-year extension for $42 million, $14 million average annual value. That's a lot less than Mafe, and I think it's less than he would have got if he would have hit the open market next year. That's just outside the top 30 in the NFL right now when it comes to edge rushers. 10 sacks in his career. He had the 8 in 2024 and then just 2 last year in 14 games, 5 tackles for loss, 13 quarterback hits. But he led the Seahawks with a 16.7% pressure rate. The pressures were there. The PFF scores 73.9 run defense. That puts him 16th in the league against eligible edge defenders. So that really shows you how much better he's gotten as a run defender. I think that was a big part of why Seattle wanted him to stick around. The pass rush, 32nd according to PFF out of 115 edge players. But man, he was good in the postseason too, wasn't he? And when the Seahawks signed him to that extension, they said, look, we think he has double-digit sack seasons in his future. And this is a good example why. I know that Will Campbell, was playing on a bum knee in the Super Bowl, but that's still, look, he's an NFL tackle in the Super Bowl. You see Hall coming off the edge here and just absolutely obliterating him. Blowing by him, and then the finish, right? The intensity to grab the jersey, and then the finish to make sure and wrap up Drake May, get him on the ground, one of 2 sacks in the Super Bowl. Definitely think a sign of things to come. His other sack was not against Will Campbell. He was coming off the other edge and kind of looped inside on a little bit of a combo block, but just a really nice example. And then the story of who this guy is, right? Doesn't lend itself to why he's important in 2026, but born months premature. His mother was encouraged to go ahead and take him off life support, let him go, and she refused. And look what that little preemie baby has turned out to be. Even when he first started playing football and in youth leagues, he still had some trouble with lung capacity and breathing, and he's become a physical specimen. And the person I've mentioned this on the show before. I had many instances to interact with him in my restaurant career with all the great relationship that we had with the Seahawks. And he's one of those guys that always asks how you're doing. He remembers who you are. He's just a great guy, which is why I was so frustrated last year with that whole thing happened where he stepped on, was it Kevin Dotson's ankle? I was convinced after watching the video 100 times that it was inadvertent, that he was actually kind of trying to take weight off of the ankle. The Rams fans made it into a whole lot more than it was. I thought the one-game suspension was unwarranted. I like how the Seahawks, staff and teammates, everybody else came to his defense. Yeah, he's an intense player. And he's one of those guys, kind of a classic example of someone who's the person that you meet doesn't really match up sometimes with the animal that you see on the field. But he is a beast, and I think his best football is ahead of him. So I thought this was a really, really great a coup by the Seahawks and John Schneider, really, to get him signed that early. And another in a long list of reasons, and another testament to the culture that's been built in Seattle, that players want to be a part of it. And he flat out said at his contract signing press conference, I know I'm leaving some money on the table. I could have made more money next year, but this is where I wanted to be, and I wanted to take care of it now. And Derek Hall, one of my favorite Seahawks, but also I think one of the most important, because if there was a little bit of a critique with the Seahawks defense last year, it was that on a week-in, week-out basis, the pressures didn't always convert to sacks. And in particular, against the Rams, only getting Stafford on the ground one time in 3 games, that's not going to cut it against a healthy Matt Stafford and a Sean McVay offense with all that continuity they have coming back. Their entire offense comes back from a year ago. So if Stafford's healthy, watch out. They're going to be dangerous. They have to move him off his spot, affect him as a passer, and get him on the ground in order to slow down that offense. They can't continue to mess around with giving those guys 500 yards on offense and have to match them with their own offense, because the Rams went out and made some big moves on defense to get better on that side of the ball this year. And so, we want to try to avoid the shootouts. Let's slow down that Rams offense. And the way to do that, the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to get to Stafford. And so let's convert some of those pressures to sacks. And that's why I think Hall is so key to that. Can he get back more? Can he get the 8 sacks again that he had in 2024? Can he convert that 17% pressure rate into more sacks? I think the Seahawks and Mike McDonald have some things up their sleeve that could help with that. Sounds like Nick Emmanwori is going to be a big part of the pass rush plan, and that could open up some opportunities for Hall to kind of take that next step in his pass rush development and start getting to the quarterback a little bit more. Here's what I've done so far. Here's the first 10. Counting down from 20, Josh Jobe, cornerback, of course. Julian Love at 19, Anthony Bradford at 18, Riley Mills at 17. I think his contributions this year and his role and his potential take some pressure off of Byron Murphy and add another pass rush element to that line, puts him at number 17. I got A.J. Barner at 16, DeMarcus Lawrence at 15, Abe Lucas at 14, Rashid Shaheed at number 13, Ernest Jones the fourth, who got disrespected again today by the ESPN rankings, at number 12, and then Derek Hall at number 11. Again, if you're just joining me, this is my opinion of the most important Seahawks, not necessarily the best Seahawks. All right, so at number 10, Gray Zabel, 24 years old, and this is going to be a common theme throughout this top 10 and really throughout this top 20. Pay attention to the ages, you guys. Gray Zabel entering his second year in the league. Of course, last year's first-round draft pick, just 24 years of age still. 6'6", 316 pounds, signed through 2028. Plus, of course, as a first-round pick, he's got that fifth-year player option, or fifth-year team option. I list a key 2025 stat for each player and then what I expect their role to be this year and the reason they're on this list. His key 2025 stat, he was ESPN's top-ranked interior offensive lineman in all of the NFL in their run block win rate metric, which is based on their GPS sensors and their next-gen stats at 83%. So as a rookie, struggled at times in pass protection. Not that we think it's a weakness in his game. It's certainly something that we think he's going to be good at, right? But man, as a run blocker, at least according to ESPN and Next Gen Stats, said he was the best in the NFL, period, among interior offensive linemen. Now, you're going to find something interesting with ZELLE and then someone else that shows up on this list in just a little bit. PFF didn't love grade ZELLE. And, say what you want about PFF. I always kind of give this disclaimer when I use grades. It's not gospel. It's not something that, we should all use to determine black or white, whether a player's good or not. But it is a measuring tool. And it is an entire business that all that they do is they evaluate film and they grade every single snap that these players play. Now, you can disagree with their grading system, but it does give us just kind of a barometer at times of a player's value. I also like to look at, sometimes you can see improvement or regression, right? Because it's the same people, presumably, grading these players. So we get to see over time the variances there among their grades. Well, they didn't love ZELLE. 57.3 overall score last year, a grade. That puts him 51st out of 81 eligible guards. They liked him a little bit more as a pass blocker, actually. 59th out of 81 with a 58.6. And then as a run blocker, he had a 56.3. Now, that ESPN poll that's going on that wraps up on Friday, where Jeremy Fowler and the staff at ESPN polls a bunch of league executives around the league, different front office personnel and scouts. ZELLE almost made the top 10, just outside in honorable mention. And one of the things that one talent evaluator in the league said, quote, he played his ass off as a rookie. He's going to be a Pro Bowler for Seattle. Excellent, end quote. I don't think there's any question he's going to be a Pro Bowler. And I've said this before, I think we're going to see all pros in his future as well. That's what I believe his ceiling is. There's some really cool interviews going around this week with him on a couple of different podcasts. But I did just see a quote before we went live here on Twitter where he was relating, from one of those podcasts, where he was relating how he reacted to the news that Myles Garrett was traded to the Rams. And he was coming out of an offensive line meeting and he got a text. And his first reaction, this is what I love. That's what I love about Gray ZELLE. We saw him stand up to Calais Campbell. We saw him talk some crap to some older veterans. He doesn't shy away from anyone, even though he's from a small town and played at a smaller school or at a lower level. He said, great, Cleveland Browns just gave us a Christmas present, early Christmas present. So he can't wait to face Myles Garrett. I'm sure he probably feels the same way about Aaron Donald because it's looking more and more like he is going to come back this year for the Rams. So ZELLE checks in at 10. Number 9, his good buddy, his former college roommate, Jalen Sundell at center. Now, interestingly enough, Sundell, 26 years old, entering into his third year, 6'5", 301, played with ZELLE at North Dakota State, of course, won a couple national championships. He's signed through, and this is a little bit tricky because when you're an undrafted free agent, it's a little bit different, but he has restricted free agent status through 2027. So the Seahawks essentially can control him contractually through 2027. Became the full-time starter last year, beat out Olu Oluwatimi in training camp. His key 2025 stat, after his Week 15 return, remember he missed 4 games, had to go on the injured list with an injury. When he came back in Week 15, the team yards per carry went from 3.98 to 4.48. Now, I'm not saying he was the only reason for that. There were other factors, of course. We saw a more disciplined Kenneth Walker. And then I think you can just make the argument that the line as a whole, very, very young. First year under John Benton in a new scheme, started to come together. But the uptick in the running game especially was much, much better once he came back a half a yard, average yards per carry, once he came back off that stint on the injured list. He seemed like a different player when he came back. We see that with young players. Sometimes they get a break, they watch some film, they step away from the action for a little while, they watch how someone else plays. And Olu Oluwatimi, I thought, represented himself well in those 4 games, looked good. In fact, I remember there was some speculation on our show. I wasn't 100% sure Sundell was just going to automatically get his job back. Good thing that he did, though, because here's, I mentioned earlier, one of the things I like about PFF is it does give you kind of a standard from one source where you can see upticks or you can see downturns. They actually liked him better than ZELLE last year. They gave him a 64.6 overall rating. That puts him right in the middle, 19th out of 40 centers. As a pass blocker, they had him 15th among centers. As a run blocker, 24th. But from week 7 on, they had him at 73.5, which would put him at 10th overall among qualified centers. He played 734 offensive snaps in 13 games. He was credited with giving up 0 sacks on the season on 407 pass block snaps, 11 total pressures, 2 quarterback hits allowed. And I think it's safe to assume, and the reason that he's on this list, I've got his expected role there as offensive line pivot communicator in this Shanahan system. The center makes the protection calls. Remember when Ryan Grubb was the offensive coordinator, it was on the quarterback. That's why we saw Geno Smith doing so much at the line of scrimmage, and sometimes the clock would wind down because he had to, in addition to checking out of plays, checking into plays, making audibles, he was responsible for calling the protections as well. It's on the center in this scheme. Kubiak brought that in, and Brian Fleury continues that. And so very, very important role. I expect him to be a better player. You saw how much better he got as the season went along last year. I think another year, another offseason, hopefully a little bit stronger. Sometimes we question how stout he is. We question the base against power. And he's going to have to face some power now, especially against that Rams team, right? But not just the Rams, some of the other interior defensive linemen, not just in the NFC West that he has to face twice a year, but in that schedule this year, tougher schedule. So I really look for good things from Jalen Sundell. I think he's got Pro Bowl potential in his future. So this is a big year for him. Restricted free agent next year, right? There's some other guys on the roster that have played center or that project to play center. We've already talked about Anthony Bradford in the first 10, right? Where did I have him? 18th, I think. So we're not going to go over that again. But there's some speculation maybe he gets extended. If that were to happen, we're going to have a conversation about Bo Stevens maybe playing center. He took some snaps there during Super Bowl week, and there are some scouts that think that he might be a very, very good center. That might be his best position. And so it's a big year for Jalen Sundell. And he's, if he can take that next step, very, very, very important for the Seahawks. And we're not done with offensive line. Little hint there, and then we'll talk about my favorite thing about this offensive line group overall. At number 8, and this should surprise nobody, he's probably gotten as much publicity and as much chatter this offseason as any player on the roster. Jadarian Price, the first-round draft pick, right? The 32nd pick overall out of Notre Dame. 22 years old, 5'11", 209 pounds, obviously on that rookie contract, so signed through 2029 plus a fifth-year option. Key 2025 stat, his explosive run rate tops in the NCAA last year at 21.2%. 1 out of every 5 times he touched the football, he gained more than 10 yards. A bunch of other explosive metrics too, where he finished among first or second in the NCAA amongst running backs. So his expected role, lead back and home run threat. Now, there's been a lot of talk lately about, they'd still prefer a tandem and a timeshare, and that he'll initially share some carries with Emmanuel Wilson and potentially George Holani will take some of the third down stuff. Maybe Zach Charbonnet is ahead of schedule. We might see him in October as opposed to November, maybe even in September. That might be a little aggressive. But they drafted him for a reason. Brady Henderson, right after he was drafted, was one of the first guys to say, look, and even before the draft said, one of the reasons they're considering Jadarian Price in the first round is because they need to replace that explosive element that Ken Walker took with him to the Chiefs. Some of these other guys in the running back room, guys that we like, don't quite have that ability. So Price, very, very important to the Seahawks offense. And I'm excited to see the passing game usage. They didn't do that much with him at Notre Dame, of course. That's gotten a lot of attention. But everything we saw on video and everything we heard from the guys that were there watching practice during OTAs and mini camps, he looked natural catching the football to me. And everybody said he looked natural even in the reps that you didn't see on camera. And then Mike McDonald told us he wants the running backs more consistently involved in the offense. Brock Heward and Matt Hasselbeck talked about how, they were never really the first or second read with Clint Kubiak, but he expects to see that now, which should come as no surprise because Brian Fleury obviously coming from that Shanahan offense, and we've seen what Christian McCaffrey has done in that offense and even other guys when given the opportunity. So very, very important for them to be the offense they want to be. I think Rashid Shaheed, who we talked about in the first 10 on this list, and Jadarian Price are going to have to provide that explosive big play element in order to take some of that pressure off Jackson Smith-Njigba and open some things up for him and the running game, of course. At number 7 on my list of top 20 most important Seahawks, Byron Murphy II. Just 23 years old still, entering his third year, 6 feet, 306 pounds. His key 2025 stat, 7 sacks, really showed his ability to penetrate, his quickness, his ability to get to the quarterback. Expected role, I call him a double team destroyer and a defensive line anchor. He's another one of those guys. Didn't make the top 10 on that poll of league executives on ESPN, but just outside the top 10. Honorable mention, one NFL defensive coach, veteran NFL defensive coach said, quote, he's so explosive, teams double him and he can break through it. He's embraced the nose tackle role, which he doesn't play all the time, but almost half the time. And we've talked ever since they drafted him about trying to take some of that pressure off of him, right? Maybe Devin Eastern is that guy, the 7th round pick this year. Maybe Brandon Peely takes another step forward in his development. But it's, maybe Riley Mills helps take some of those double teams away. But he embraces it. He loves it. And he's really, really good at it. So even though he's not, typical traditional size. But PFF had him 25th overall among 134 qualifying interior defensive linemen. As a pass rusher, they had him 13th. As a run defender, 72nd. There's all pros in his future. I think that's the last time he doesn't make that top 10 list. We haven't seen where he shows up yet on the NFL Network player survey of top 100 players, but we know he's going to be there. He's only going to get better, just 23 years old. They say that we don't physically mature till we're 24, 25 years old, and that shows up more often in the linemen, that offensive linemen, defensive linemen, especially the interior guys, tend to mature and reach their peak later in their career. Just imagine if Byron Murphy has more in the tank and can actually get better. All right, at number 6, speaking of someone who's young and whose best years are ahead of him, what a great rookie year for Nick Emenwari, and he didn't even play 17 games because of the early injury. Just 22 years old, still entering his second year, 6'3", 220 pounds, signed through 2028. Key 2025 stats, it was hard to pick one because there were so many. He had 2.5 sacks. He's all over the place. 9 tackles for loss and 11 passes defensed. I showed those two because I do think it shows off and illustrates how he's just everywhere. That's why I've got his expected role everywhere, all of it. And we're going to see even a different element from him in 2026. In an interview he did himself a couple of months ago, during the mini camp range, he said that he expects to be used more as an edge rusher this year. And the coaches have told him they see some Micah Parsons in him. Now, they're not going to make him a full-time edge rusher, but, man, you could see it, right? You could see it. And we talked a lot during the early part of the offseason about that edge group and is it complete enough? And, They added Dante Fowler and they got some young guys that they like, but is there an opportunity for a trade? Could they have added another veteran? They looked into some of that stuff, haven't done anything yet. The last I've been, the indications I've been given is that, they like what they have right now and they're willing to wait until the trade deadline to see if they need some help then. But I think part of that now, it makes more sense now. If they plan on using Nick Emenwari as an edge rusher, man, the sky was already the limit for him, but that just adds another element to how difficult it's going to be for teams to prepare for him offensively. In his first year as a rookie, according to PFF, overall 22nd among 98 safeties. His coverage grade, 26th among 98. His run defense grade, 46 out of 98. Safety rankings haven't come out yet in that ESPN poll. Wouldn't be surprised. Might be a little early, but wouldn't be surprised if he shows up maybe in honorable mention. All right, let's finish out through number 5 and then a quick break, and then we'll have the top 4. But the number 5 most important player on the Seahawks roster, according to me, Leonard Williams. 32 years old now, coming off arguably his best season as a pro. Not statistically, actually had some bigger numbers in 2024, but I think his impact was felt more in 2025 and how his impact allowed other guys to get to the quarterback and to make plays. 6'5", 310 pounds, entering his 12th year, signed through 2026. Entering the last year of his deal, there hasn't been a lot of talk. I've done shows on it, how I think it hasn't been talked about enough. But there have been some indications. I've been told that there's mutual interest in an extension. I think the question is, he's probably at that point in his career where I think he just had another young addition to his family in the last year. How much longer does he want to keep playing? So maybe it's not a 3-year extension. Maybe it's a 2-year deal. Or maybe they structure it in a way that, it's a 3 so they can spread some things out, but that 3rd year is easy to get out of, and so he can kind of decide if he wants to play or not. Sort of like they did the DeMarcus Lawrence deal, where, we've all been assuming that Lawrence isn't going to play in 2027, finish that thing out. But based on some of his comments this offseason, he very well might. Might be a similar situation with Leonard Williams. Man, I hope, he's playing his best football. And I think that was evidence. We've talked about that ESPN survey of league executives. Number 1 amongst defensive tackles. He moves all the way up from number 6 a year ago. Second team All-Pro in 2025, back-to-back Pro Bowls with Seattle. He also produced, in addition to the 7 sacks, 58 total pressures last year, 4th among interior defensive linemen. PFF had him 11th overall. ESPN had him number 1. And one quote from an executive, he's the total package. Evaluators praised his ability to line up across the front, number of different positions, beat tackles, beat guards, beat centers. He's violent. He really epitomizes everything that Mike McDonald looks for in a defensive lineman, and that's why we love him. And he's also just not a loud, boisterous vocal leader, but I feel like he's kind of the calming influence. He's sort of the cooler heads prevail and the voice of reason in that locker room. Love Leonard Williams. Really got to go down as one of John Schneider's best trades of all time. We'll get to the final 4, and then I'll recap. We'll show you the full top 20 again, but I want to let you know about Prize Picks, who is sponsoring this episode, the number 1 app in America for daily fantasy sports. We're on the All-Star break right now, playing the game as we speak, right? But once the Mariners get going again, and hopefully they get going again, it's a good way to try it out. Really gives you a different perspective and a different way to enjoy and follow a game. And it doesn't just have to be one game. You can make picks across entire leagues, any sport you prefer. But just for an example, you can pick on the next Mariner game. You scroll down through the players in that game through a number of different statistical categories, and you simply select more or less on each one, and you build out your 6-player lineup, and then you watch how it unfolds. And if you download the app today and sign up using the promo code HMA and play a $5 lineup, they're going to instantly bonus you with $50 in lineups. Download the Prize Picks app today. Sign up using that promo code HMA. Play a $5 lineup, and they're going to give you $50 in additional lineups instantly. Check to see if it's available in your state. It's available in most states. Always play responsibly. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. All right, so let me just load up. I got to make sure I've got all of the remaining players, because StreamYard only lets you have 10 loaded up. And then we'll give you the final four, and then we'll just chat, take some questions, give away a T-shirt. Let's do this, and then we'll do that, and then we'll do this. All right. So number 4 on my list of most important Seahawk players, Spoon, Devin Witherspoon. Hold on, hang on. Here we go. There it is. Sorry about that. 25 years old, entering his 4th year, 6 foot, 185 pounds. He was Pro Football Focus's number 1 graded corner in the entire league last year, the only cornerback to get a grade of over 90. In coverage, he was second. In run defense, he was second. So he was first overall. Interesting thing about Spoon is he only has 2 interceptions in his career. One as a rookie, right? I think it was in his 3rd game, if I remember correctly. I expect that at some point that pendulum's going to swing, and that is going to turn. And he's going to start taking the football away. Now, he caused a turnover in the Super Bowl. Really kind of the defining play of that game. Uchenna Nwosu scoops it up, runs it in for the touchdown. But we know that his MO is Swiss Army knife. He's going to play on the outside. He's going to play some nickel. He is going to play off the edge. We saw how great of a blitzer he can be in the Super Bowl. I really thought he had a great case for MVP in that game. So I've got his expected role as chaos. Now we need to get him signed long term. The Seahawks had hoped when they picked up his 5th-year option the same day that they picked up Jackson Smith-Njigba's, they thought they were going to get him signed in due time, probably shortly after they got JSN signed. Still hasn't happened yet. Everyone, especially Brady Henderson's been very, very consistent on this. He expects it to happen sometime during training camp. He doesn't think it's going to be an issue. All indications are that the ownership change isn't going to impact whether or not he gets this deal. I think the holdup is that the agency that represents him is the same agency that represents Christian Gonzalez. They were drafted the same year. They're both up for extensions. And so the agency is trying to get them both the biggest deals they can. And how do you manage that? For one, like you'd want them both to be able to lay claim to biggest cornerback contract of all time. So they're both using that Trent McDuffie deal with the Rams as their measuring stick. But they're very different players, and they do different things, and they're utilized in different ways. Christian Gonzalez is a traditional outside cover corner. Devin Witherspoon is, as I mentioned, he's chaos, unleashed. You never know where he's coming from. He does a bunch of different things. And so, who gets the deal first? Who blinks first? How does that work? And you have 2 different organizations that like to structure contracts in 2 different ways. So we'll see. They also went about their off seasons in different ways. Christian Gonzalez largely didn't participate in OTAs. Devin Witherspoon was there every single day. Now, he didn't always participate in every snap in practice, but he was there. He was engaged. He wasn't doing the what do they call that? The stand-in, where you show up for practice but you don't do anything. You refuse to do anything. That's not his MO. He's Mike McDonald's favorite player. That contract's going to get done. I think it'll get done here in the next 30 days or so. So important to that defense because of all the chaos that he creates. That's why he's number 4 on my list of most important players. Number 3, it's the left tackle. It's Sam's blindside protector, Charles Cross. And here's the crazy thing. He's entering into the 5th year of his deal. He's already signed the big extension. So he's signed through 2030. He's still just 25 years old, you guys. Still just 25. He gets better every year. I think he got a little bit stronger last year. I think he can get a little bit stronger this year. He can be a little bit better of a run blocker. PFF had him as a pass blocker last year at 18th out of 89. As a run blocker, 43rd out of 89. Only 2 sacks allowed last year from the blind side. Another guy that made honorable mention on that survey, and really got some nice comments about his athleticism and what a good pass protector he is from some guys around the league. He's just someone that just every year people get to know him a little bit better. He's not talked about in those circles as some of the other big name tackles in the league, but the league knows about him and just what a solid player he is. Maybe he's never a first team All-Pro, but he doesn't need to be, right? Just a steadying influence. And I told you I had a number that I really like. So did some calculations, and assuming that it's the same starting 5 that starts week 1 that started last year, right? Cross, ZELLE, Sundell, Bradford, Abe Lucas, all 5 on this list. So 25% of this list is the offensive line. That shows you how important that is to the hopes and dreams of this offense. They had to play too much 6-man protection last year. If this offensive line takes another step forward with the continuity and in their communication and working together in pass protection, maybe they can get out of that just a little bit more. The average age of the 5 starters for the Seahawks, 25.2 years old, as we sit here today. The average age of the backups, Christian Haynes, Bryce Cabledew, Mason Richmond, Bo Stevens, Amari Kite, and Josh Jones. And Josh Jones is 29. The average age of the backups is 25.3. The entire unit is incredibly young. So we talk about the continuity of the starters, but how about all the backups too? And the familiarity with the scheme, and then all the work they get in training camp working in different combinations. After, nearly 10 years of really struggling to put together a competent offensive line, let alone a good one, you're starting to see the respect come in around the league for this entire group as they're starting to be ranked much higher in these preseason lists than we've ever seen them before. So Charles Cross checks in at number 3. You could probably figure out who my top 2 are. It's just a matter of what order are they going to be in, right? Well, this is how I did it. The number 2 most important player for the Seattle Seahawks, of course, is your reigning NFL Offensive Player of the Year, Jackson Smith-Njigba. Another guy signed through 2031 on his massive second contract, and yet still just 24 years old. I told you there was a theme, right? This is a young roster, and the best part is their stars are young. 6 foot, 197 pounds, expected role, offensive focal point, still, again. Now, we hope it's a little more balanced. We hope that, as I mentioned, Jarian Price, Rashid Shaheed, maybe the tight ends get a little bit more consistent usage in the passing game, take some of that pressure off Jackson Smith-Njigba. So I could see a season where maybe he doesn't catch 119 balls again, but his average yards per catch goes up. Maybe he scores more touchdowns, right? The explosives, the big plays, because teams won't just be able to focus as much on him. He is just, you talk about poster child for everything that John Schneider looks for in a football player and everything Mike McDonald appreciates in a football player. They talk about the player and the person, the work ethic, how much he cares about ball, how much he cares about the team, wanted to get that deal done quickly. He is the real deal. And in an era where players still talk about how wide receivers are deep. Tom Brady just did an interview within the last month on a podcast talking about how he had to deal with diva wide receiver personalities and attitudes his entire career and how frustrating that was for him. JSN's never going to be that guy. He's never going to say, give me the damn ball. Now, he might get competitive in a game or two and say, hey, man, hey, I got my guy beat. Look for me. He's never going to be a problem, never going to be an issue. I don't think that's the last time he's ever going to win Offensive Player of the Year. I'll tell you that much. Which obviously leaves number 1 on the list. The most important player for the Seattle Seahawks this year is the quarterback. And it's not always the quarterback. It's not. But in this case, it certainly is. I've spent a lot of time this offseason talking about the step I expect Sam Darnold to take, the improvement that I expect him to take, the improvement that we saw in the turnovers after the Week 11 game against the Rams, which is why I've got as his key 2025 stat on this graphic that he led the NFL in total turnovers with 20. right? It wasn't just the interceptions, it was the lost fumbles. Got to take better care of the football. He's gotten better every year since he's become a full-time starter. And the thing that I'm really excited about this year, we saw the success the year he had in Minnesota, carried that over, had similar success his first year in Seattle, won a Super Bowl. And we saw him get better and improve, even at the age of 28. Now he's going to be 29 this season. We saw him get better, and I still think he can. He talked about it a lot this offseason, the things he's working on. Cut those turnovers down a little bit. I think this offense is built in such a way that, maybe it takes Brian Fleury a couple of games to get his feet under him, but I think there's going to be a lot of explosive plays to be had. And this is the first time Sam Darnold's ever gotten an opportunity to come back a second year to a good team. Yeah, he lost Clint Kubiak, but the things you hear about Brian Fleury, extremely positive. Yeah, he lost Andrew Janocko as quarterback coach, but Jake Peetz is back. Justin Outen's back. John Benton's back to coach the offensive line. He's got his entire offensive line group in front of him. And what's the stat I keep talking about this offseason? You take the running backs out of the mix because they share carries, so they're never going to hit 700 snaps. But and then Sam obviously had 700 snaps, and then all 9 of his non-running back teammates who were full-time starters last year that had 700 snaps or more are all back. He's going to be better this year than he was a year ago, and the league is starting to recognize it as well. He finished just outside the top 10 in that ESPN poll. You're seeing him show up in the top 12, 14 in all these offseason lists of best quarterbacks in the league. The only people, I tweeted this the other day, the league recognizes it, his teammates do, the players around the league. I think you're going to see him finish, well, we already know he's going to finish ahead of Brock Purdy and Lamar Jackson on this NFL Network Top 100, which players vote on. So we know that players think highly of Sam Darnold. The only people who don't still are opposing fans. They're the ones that just don't buy into it. Everyone else does. He finished basically 11th in that ESPN poll. One high-ranking AFC team official said, what a career bounce back. He's been lights out for 2 years, deserves to be in the top 10. PFF had him 10th overall last year, 8th in passing grade. He had 29 big-time throws. 4th in the NFL in his deep passing grade. His grades against zone were outstanding. Against pressure were outstanding. And yet his average annual value, his contract pays him 15th in the NFL. It's pretty good value, right? 4,048 passing yards last year, 25 passing touchdowns, 14 interceptions. He had 5 postseason touchdowns, did not turn the ball over in the postseason, was stellar in the NFC Championship game against the Rams. Wouldn't have been in the Super Bowl without him. And as much as, he even went on Bussin' with the Boys and said he didn't think he played well in the Super Bowl, I thought he was being a little too hard on himself. First half wasn't great, but the second half he was outstanding. And if he had put 2 halves together like he had in the second half, he would have been MVP. So let's recap. First, 20, Josh Jobe. 19, Julian Love. 18, Anthony Bradford. 17, Riley Mills. 16, A.J. Barner. 15, DeMarcus Lawrence. 14, Abe Lucas. 13, Rashid Shaheed. 12, Ernest Jones. 11, Derek Hall. And then the top 10 unveiled tonight. 10, Gray Zabel. 9, Jalen Sundell. 8, Jadarian Price. 7, Byron Murphy II. 6, Nick Emanwari. 5, Leonard Williams. 4, Devin Witherspoon. 3, Charles Cross. 2, Jackson Smith-Njigba. And 1, Sam Darnold. What's up, guys? How are we doing? Sean Scotchman checking in with a $5 super chat. Appreciate that. Olu versus Stevens at center. Who you got? Trades? Well, I'll say this. Olu's in the last year of his deal this year. And so, I think there's probably a starting opportunity out there, at least a chance for him to compete for a starting job next year. So I don't think an early extension really makes sense for the player. Maybe it does for the team. It's nice to have a starting caliber backup center, right? The thing about Olu, though, is even though they've worked him at guard a little bit, he's not a great fit there. So he's not the ideal, multi-position guy in the way that Stevens could be. Now, there's been no indication the Seahawks have that they see Stevens as a center. So one of the things I'll have my eyes on when we're there for the week of camp, and I'll give you some details on that here in a minute, is last year it was really interesting to see how they worked Cable Dew and Richmond and even Christian Haynes before he got banged up, and how many center snaps they all got and how much guard play they got. I want to see if they use Stevens a little bit at center, because if Anthony Bradford takes another step, he's in a contract year. He went to work with Duke Manyweather this offseason, one of the best offensive line gurus out there. If he can shore up some of those technical deficiencies, still just 25 years old, you guys, and he gets a little bit better and builds off of how good he looked later in the year last year, and they extend him, then you start thinking about plan B for Bo Stevens, and I think center would make a lot of sense. And maybe not converting him there full time, but working him in there, getting him comfortable there so he could kind of be that back. I love Bo Stevens, but here's how I feel about competition, and here's how I feel about football. If Bo Stevens never becomes a starter for the Seahawks, as much as I love the guy, it's a good thing, because it means that they've put together a really good offensive line. He just can't crack the lineup. And so, I think this year you primarily play him at guard, but maybe you work him in there. You see if it works. You see how comfortable he is. They love positional versatility in all their guys, those interior guys for sure. Both sides, center guard. Some of those guys, Richmond, Sundell even can kick out, play some tackle. But Oluwatimi being the last year of his deal, I think, he's the backup this year for certain. Unless someone comes along and, there's still some consternation, I think, in Baltimore about their center situation. Maybe they get to camp and they don't like what they have, and someone wants to toss you a 4th-round pick in a loaded 2027 draft. Maybe Olu gets moved. There was some talk around the draft of potentially moving him. I was told that scenario would have only unfolded if a specific particular player got to them at a certain point of the draft. Doesn't sound like that happened, but that's kind of where we're at with that. Osiris with the $9.99 super chat. So you got yourself a training camp shirt, unless anyone comes in and snipes you and tops you. Does Blitz get an honorable mention, or maybe he's ranked number 0? I like it. Although Blitz wasn't happy with a piece that I wrote on my Substack about Elijah Arroyo a few weeks ago. He replied to me on Twitter with a trash can emoji. I was like, Blitz, come on, man. Just trying to be objective. Yeah, and I guess, if you want to stretch the rules and take it outside the realm of the roster, you could say, Vinod, Niru, and Neil Khosla are the most important players. We'll see how they operate as owners. Certainly, there's a lot we're going to learn about over the next year or so. Cope approach, already looking ahead to the 2027 draft, which again is supposed to be stacked, you guys. I got a real jump right after the draft at looking at edge players and defensive tackles, and man, I was blown away by both of those groups. But then I just haven't been able to dig in. But once I get back from training camp, I'll start to look at that a little bit so I can set myself up and get organized for who I'm going to watch throughout the season. But yeah, I think, look, we have 12 picks as we sit here today in the 2027 draft, and it is considered one of the strongest, deepest drafts with a lot of top end, high quality blue chip talent at the top, spread among a bunch of different key, important premium positions. BPA is going to be where it's at. You can sit here a year out and say, well, edge rusher, right? The only guys they have under contract for 2027 right now are Derek Hall and DeMarcus Lawrence, and then, the undrafted guys. So maybe that's it, but it's just, you can't force it. John Schneider doesn't force it. Let's see how the draft falls. It absolutely, if Anthony Bradford goes in free agency, or I think there's a less than 0 chance that Anthony Bradford could get traded. I think the only way that would happen would be that Bo Stevens would have to just absolutely win the job in camp. Then it would probably make sense for them to potentially trade Anthony Bradford. But either way, it's very possible that center or guard could be a high need in the draft. Probably not in the first round because of all the guys that they have, but I could see that. Absolutely. And I haven't looked at the class. I don't know how good the class is supposed to be. We've kind of gotten spoiled the last few years. The interior offensive line groups have been pretty good. Yeah. Little Bond checks in with a comment about the owners. He says, I believe the Coastals will be Allen's 2.0. That sure sounds like the impression that they have made on Jody, Burt Cole, Chuck Arnold, Mike McDonald, John Schneider, the brain trust of the Seahawks, is they see some similarities and some parallels. I love the fact that it's going to be a family business, because it was at the beginning, the Nordstrom family, and then Ken Behring, and then the Allen family essentially has carried the torch for the last 25 years or so. That's the vibe. That's certainly the vibe, and I think that's the thing that really appealed to Jody and those guys about it, is they feel good about how they're gonna manage this team. And again, I don't want to expand too much on it tonight because I did a couple of long shows about it, so go check those out for my full thoughts and their background and everything. But they seem genuine, and their track record of succeeding in business and conducting business in the right way is encouraging for me. Osiris checking in again with another super chat. He's got the clubhouse lead right now for the training camp t-shirt. Maybe the new owners give us the top analytics and our player health teams in the league. That was one of the things that did really stand out when we started to learn more about them, is especially Neil, right? Like a couple of years ago, he was Forbes magazine named him one of the best healthcare professionals up and coming in the country, under 30 years old. Very into AI and analytics, and that V-Node has been analytical driven in how he evaluates business his whole career. And then you have the healthcare angle of it, right? And that Neil's mission has all been about trying to find better ways to administer healthcare and make it available to more people, make it more affordable. You put all those things together. We hear John talk about sports science all the time and how important that's been to their success, how they manage injuries, how they train players. And now you're basically being bought by some of the most AI-driven, data-driven, analytical, successful business people in the world. That seems like a pretty good marriage, right? That seems like a pretty good marriage. Charlie the Unicorn asks, with the new ownership group, would they be okay playing games in Asia, perhaps in India, China, or Japan? I don't know. I don't know that the league, I haven't heard that the league has looked into playing games there. So I don't know if we're going to get there or not. But everything that we've heard is the analytics, right? If the analytics suggest that those kinds of trips are detrimental to your team, then they're probably not going to support it. I think it sounds like nothing these people do is based on knee-jerk, emotional, reactionary decision-making. It's everything measured, evaluated, get all the data, all the information you can, get all your people together that you trust, that are good at their jobs, make the best decision you can, not just for today, but also with your eye on the future and the long-term 360-degree impact. That's how they make their decisions, based on their track record. And so, yeah, I know that, V-Nodes and Niru are from India, but they sure don't sound like the kind of people that have conducted themselves for the last 50 years in a way that would suggest that they would say, hey, let's push the league to get a game in India because that would be cool. That's just not how they've operated. Osiris says, McDonald still has some surprises in store. I think so too. We've never seen Mike McDonald run a defense for a third season. What would he have done if he had stayed in Baltimore for one more year with that group? What does he have in store for this group with all the continuity? 7 players back that played 400 snaps or more on that defense. What is that going to allow him to do? T.R. Pierce says, great list, Dan. Appreciate it. Thank you. Ganos, 9869 says, it's just so hard to not like Sam. It is, isn't it? Like, he's so chill and laid back, but you see the competitiveness too. He reminds me in some ways of Matt Hasselbeck. Matt would get a little bit more fiery though, and even hot-headed at times. You don't quite see that in Sam, but you feel it. You feel the competitiveness. But it's the ability to bounce back from a bad play. And it's that resilience that he's built, right? That suit of armor that he's built from all the shit that he went through in New York and then going to Carolina. And that was a weird situation where he's brought in there. He's traded for to be the starter, but it didn't go great his first year. And there were some injuries. And then they brought Baker in and then he lost his starting job. Like that whole thing was weird. I think what that's done, that can ruin guys. We've seen that ruin quarterbacks before. Even quarterbacks with good talent. A lot of times when these high draft picks bust, we find out that, oh, the talent and the makeup from the neck up wasn't worthy of being drafted that high, and that's ultimately why they never succeeded. But some of these players do have the talent, and then they just don't get that second opportunity. Well, Sam kind of got a fourth opportunity, fifth opportunity, and the talent was always there. And the mindset was there. He just needed the right system, and he needed someone to believe in him and give him a true opportunity. And so he was ready. He was ready. Osiris says, I'm going to laugh so hard when the Rams are the third best team in the division by the time we play them. I like more and more that we don't play until week 16. I hated it when the schedule first came out. I don't think it should ever happen. I think you should play all your divisional opponents once in the first half and once in the second half. They should plug that into the software before they run the schedule. It should be one of the non-negotiables. But now I like it because that Rams team is loaded. And it sounds like Aaron Donald's going to try to come back. And I don't think that he's going to be the same player he was 3 years ago. He wasn't the same player 3 years ago that he was the year before that or the year before that. And that is really tough. We saw it last year with Frank Ragnow trying to come back after a retirement. Like the body just to ramp up again to play NFL football at the age of 35 after 2 years off. But we're also talking about one of the greatest of all time. And if he's anything close to what he used to be, that is going to be a loaded front. That's not a perfect roster. There's some things you can exploit, I think. But I am a believer that I want to play the best at their best and beat the best to be the best. I don't want to hope for injuries. I don't want to hope that Donald gets hurt or decides not to come back. Bring it. Bring it on. I want Myles Garrett to be healthy and playing at a high level. I want Byron Young to be playing for a contract and NASA. I want Kobe Turner to be playing for that big contract. I want Trent McDuffie to be a great fit there. I want them to be at their best. So when we play them, hopefully we're at our best. And then there's no debate. There's no debate. Go beat the best. And if they get you, okay, fine. We're still built better long term. A lot better. We'll see how it goes by week 16. The other thing about Aaron Donald, there was a lot written the last couple of days about what his contract might look like. I think Albert Breer was talking about it. I just assumed he'd come back for like the veteran minimum to help him out salary cap wise. No, it sounds like they have like 26 million in cap, and they'll want to hold some of that back for the trade deadline and contingencies. But it sounds like he might get like a 1 year, $13-14 million deal. Okay. Add some void years. Stretch it out. Like just add on, because they got some decisions to make and they got some guys to pay next year. But bring it on. I say bring it on. Now, Hank says, I would swap Bradford and Sundell because Bradford can change the run game as seen in the playoffs, but his pass protection is subpar. I think Bradford's a key to an elite offensive line. I can get behind that. I think that's a great argument. You could, yeah, absolutely. I could have justified putting Bradford in the top 10 because, you know, you can make the case that like as he goes, so goes that offensive line. I just think it kind of starts at the center position first. But yeah, I can get behind that, Hank. I wouldn't argue with that. Yeah. All right. Let's see here. Let's get a couple more in, and then we'll give that T-shirt away to Osiris, and we'll get rolling here. Yeah, Cope Approach says, in general, I'd want the division game split, but in this case, I'd rather play the Rams later in the year. Yeah, I think you're right. Rams have let me look up their schedule again, though. They're right out of the gate, like they're going to be tested. You know, they open up, obviously, in Australia with the 49ers. I think we're all rooting for the 49ers in that game, right? Doesn't that make the most sense to you guys? It'd be better for us because of how we matched up with the 49ers last year, and I think that might be kind of, I know they're going to be healthier, and I can't wait to play them when they have all their guys. I really can't. But I just think schematically and just McDonald, it's different. What makes it different, similar scheme, I understand that. Purdy's a different quarterback than Stafford. Stafford's superpower is that he can stand back in the pocket. He's not going to beat you with his feet. He's not going to beat you with his creativity moving around the pocket. But he can wait until the last second because he trusts his eyes so much and he trusts his arm, and he can just get rid of the ball so quickly with pinpoint accuracy to deep parts of the field. And that's not Brock Purdy's game. If you move Purdy off his spot, you buy your time for your defense, and that's where that McDonald defense really shines because they shift some things. They change their coverage after the snap. Purdy's more he's more what's the word I'm looking for? He's more reliant on rhythm and timing, and because he doesn't have the big arm like Stafford does. So that's the difference, and that's why I think it's just a tougher matchup for Purdy in that offense than it is for Stafford. And so I think it's better if the 49ers beat them, don't you, in that first game? But then they play the Giants in week 2, and, you know, say what you want about what you think the Giants' record's going to be this year, but they're going to be, it's John Harbaugh, and you look at that roster, they're going to be physical. They're going to hit you in the mouth. I've said this about the Giants since they made a bunch of their offseason moves. No matter how many games they win this year, you're going to know you just played them when you wake up the next day. That's going to be a physical game. So to play them in week 2, then you go play the Broncos in Denver, then the Eagles in Philadelphia, then the Bills, 3 games in a row, 3 of the best in the NFL. That's a tough. If they go 5-0, holy crap, then bring on all the attention. They deserve it all. Super team. People will start talking about them being undefeated. The buildup for that Week 16 game could be just exponentially massive. But that's not a really cupcake start for the Rams. Yeah, and then Cope says we need that early month or 2 to get fully comfortable. I do think that's a little bit of I think it's more of an advantage for us to play the Rams week 16 and 18 than it is for them because they're so much more reliant on older players, right? They have to hope that those players can stay healthy all year. The Seahawks have some players who could play key roles on defense that are very young. I know they have high hopes for Bud Clark and hope for a big role for him as a rookie in the defense, and then we'll see how quickly Julian Neal comes along. But we talk all the time about how complex the coverage schemes are in that defense, and it takes a little while longer for those guys to learn. And so that gives them 15 games now to get all those rookies worked out and figure out what their roles are. So I think it's more an advantage for the Seahawks that they play so late in the year than it is for the Rams. Yeah, and then this is the other part of it too, Cope. And as a deeper and way younger team, we should be fresher than the Rams by then as a bonus. That's where we have an advantage over the Rams and the 49ers, I think, by a long shot, is the depth. It's the depth. I would take our 2s against the Rams 2s or the 49ers 2s. It'd be a fascinating exercise if we could kind of hypothesize that, wouldn't it? X-Wing, what's up, buddy? You going to come out and see us while we're at training camp? I'll show you that coverage here in a minute. He says, I don't hope for injuries either, but the Rams seem like a team that's going to have a very hard time avoiding them. Most of their stars are senior citizens in NFL terms. You are correct about that. Charlie the Unicorn asks, who will have the better stats, Donald or Verse? Oh, Verse. I mean, he's still an ascending player. You know, Donald's going to be, and here's the other thing is, you know, for Donald to be on the field, you're taking snaps away from Braden Fisk and Kobe Turner. So he's probably going to be a rotational player. I don't know what his snap share was when he last played in the league. It's probably not going to be that when he comes back this time. Maybe 30% snaps. Maybe he's kind of a situational guy, especially early in the season. They're not just going to throw him out there and throw him to the wolves. Charlie the Unicorn says the Rams have possible 8 primetime games already. Very tough to win them all. Indeed. Sean Scotchman says, what's the average age for the Rams? Age matters later. I don't know. And those average roster age numbers, usually you don't get those until after the rosters are cut down to 53. And so that would be a massive exercise to do at this point in the season, even for those analytical sites, because first you have to project who the 53 are going to be, and then you have to figure out their average age. So I think we'll find that out kind of week 1 or week 2, and then near the end of the season, they recalculate those things, and they do it on snap-weighted basis as well. I think at the end of last year, the Seahawks on a snap-weighted basis had the 5th youngest roster in the league, but I think early in the season, they were 2 or 3, I believe. All right, you guys. Oh, here. Cope Approach says the Rams' average age is 26.35. Don't know what that's based on or how that would compare to the Seahawks, but yeah. We'll figure out once the season gets started. Okay, let me do a couple of things. First of all, let's get this going here. God, am I a rookie? I swear. Let me get this graphic up here so I can show you again in case you guys haven't seen it. This is our coverage plan for training camp. And I just, hold on. All the things I love about StreamYard, but the fact that they limit how many files you can have waiting. Okay, here's our coverage plan. So we're going to be there the first week of April, and I say we, it's going to be me, Mookie from Field Goals, and Bryce from the Hawks. Brandon's not going to be able to make the trip. He is going to join us a couple of times on the air, so to speak, while we're live, because we are going to do our reaction shows every single night from Fast Fashion Brewing, 1723 First Avenue South, best craft beer in Seattle. So come down and see us and also drink some great beer, eat some great pizza. Wednesday, August 5th through Saturday, August 8th. The Mariners are home that week, so if you're going to see a game, you can come in and see us before. And then that Friday night town hall, we're starting at 7:30. Mariner game starts at 6:40. So if you're going to the game, you can come see us afterwards. And we're just going to hang out that night. We'll give our camp observations at the top of the show. And then we're just going to open it up for questions, comments. We'll have some giveaways. I'm going to give away my 2 season tickets to the Dallas preseason game. So that'll be one of the things. And have some hats and a couple other things as well. And then we're also going to be hanging out there before Football Fest on that Saturday, the 8th. I think we'd plan to do an actual show. I don't know that a show makes sense, but we're at least going to be hanging out. Maybe we'll do it as a meet and greet. But either way, we're going to be there on that Saturday as well. And then I'm coming earlier than those guys. And so I asked for and was granted credential access on Tuesday, August 4th. And so just look that evening, look for my thoughts, and I'll share what I saw in practice that night in a solo show. But that's our plan. So Osiris, the big winner tonight. And so he is going to take home one of these bad boys. You can order these too. You can see the price there. That is as low as that TeePublic would allow me to mark these. There's very little margin there, but $16. And these are really good quality t-shirts, you guys. If you want to get one of those, show your support for the Seahawks Syndicate, show your support for the Seahawks, and wear a training camp t-shirt. We'd love to see you out there on the berm. Like I said, I'll be down on the field on that Tuesday session, but we're going to hang out together on the berm the rest of the week. You can kind of see different things. You're not as restricted about what you can say, and then we can all hang out and compare notes together. But the link to get one of these shirts will be down in the description. If it's not right now as you're watching this live, as soon as I'm finished, I will put it down there so you can check that out. But you can just go to my merch store, which is linked down there, and find that as well. But Osiris, I don't know if I have your mailing address, but shoot me a text or an email. You've got my information, and let me know your size and your address, and I'll get that shipped out to you right away so you have it in time for training camp. Let me just see. Yeah, thanks, guys. I know we're all just kind of in a holding pattern, getting ready for training camp. There's about 150 of you in here tonight, but I urge you to go back if you haven't already. Had great numbers for the 2 shows that I did about the sale agreement for the Seahawks, and then the next day, Meet the Kosalas and kind of diving into their background and sharing my thoughts about how I feel about that whole ownership situation. If you still have any questions or you just want to know more about them, go check out those shows if you would. In the meantime, tomorrow, what do I have going tomorrow? I'm going to be starting my position group breakdowns, and I'm talking to Sanjit T from the Football Scout tomorrow about offensive line. I haven't talked to Sanjit in a while, and he's really, really great with the scouting stuff, and his level of expert, or his area of expertise is kind of centered on the offensive line. So we'll get into that a little bit, and then NFC West mixtape on Friday, and then Bryce is going to talk quarterbacks with me on or NFC West mixtape on Thursday. Bryce is going to talk to me on Friday about quarterbacks, and then we'll continue the positional breakdowns throughout the next week until training camp gets fired up officially. Always follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Please subscribe to the show. It's the best way to help support me as an independent full-time content creator. All the other ways are listed and linked down below in the description, or you can just buy me a beer at that QR code right there. The link's down in the description too, because some of you are watching on your phone. You ever run into this? And it's like you see something and it has a QR code and you want to, but you can't because you're on your phone and you can't. So the link's down in the description as well if you just want to do that. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate you being here. Love chatting with you guys. And we'll see you tomorrow. Forever and always. Go Hawks. Thanks.